Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. Now, I've said before in this discussion that each work has its own history when it comes to the reference recording, and I think that this is really one of them that sort of proves that point very, very vividly, because the work in question is Beethoven's Violin Concerto. And choosing a reference recording as your consensus pick is really a little bit awkward because every great violinist that has ever lived plays the Beethoven Violin Concerto and records it. And they take it very seriously. And their conductors take it very seriously, which means that since the dawn of the recorded age, there have been superb recordings of Beethoven's Violin Concerto and lots of choices when it comes to forming a consensus. Some violinists were automatic consensus picks. For example, when Jascha Heifetz recorded something, if you remember my 1953 Building a Library videos series, anything that Heifetz did was automatically the recording of choice. But when long-playing records came out, that began to change. It changed actually quite interestingly because you had Heifetz, of course, in stereo, who was marvelous with Munch. Then there was David Itzhak with André Cluytens, which was absolutely marvelous. I also think Nathan Milstein is right up there with the best. I mean, there was Heinrich Schering. There was just lots of people out there, great violinists. There's never been a shortage of great violinists, and there's never been a shortage of great performance of the Beethoven Violin Concerto. So, as a consequence, it's been very difficult for anything to coalesce around a single performance. But there was a moment. You see, at the period where we were most of our reference recordings were sort of selected, that is the 50s, the beginning of the stereo era up until, up through sort of the 60s, up until that period. We had every great violinist who was still alive doing the Beethoven Violin Concerto. And as a result, they sort of canceled each other out. Heifetz always was a little bit, he was regarded with suspicion in some circles because he was so technically adept that people thought that precluded deeper, more profound, whatever, it's just bullshit, but that's what people thought. So what can I say? Then you had violinists like Itzhak, who everybody worshipped. I mean, who was absolutely fabulous, but he didn't have the same name recognition or the same sort of distribution and push from his labels, because he was EMI Warner. EMI had other violinists. They had Milstein, for example. I mean, there was always competition, and so as I said, all of these wonderful performances. I mean, there was Wolfgang Schneiderhan with Joachim. I mean, they all kind of canceled each other out in a way. There was this pile of really, really fine Beethoven violin concertos, but no consensus emerged. And then what happened was, you had the younger generation coming up who were also recording the Beethoven Violin Concerto, making beautiful performances of it as well, that people recognized as very fine, but which didn't compete with the clump, which you might call not the reference recording, but the reference clump. Then, here's what gets interesting. The reference recording came along. This one, Giulini and Perlman. Now, here is the thing. This is what makes this so fascinating. First of all, this is a reference recording as much for the conductor as for the violinist, because it was brilliant on EMI's part to choose Giulini as the conductor, because he was so highly respected, and respected as a serious musician, somebody who was absolutely abhorred virtuosity for its own sake, empty showmanship, and again, it's just bullshit. But that was the impression. That's what people thought. That was what they were saying. All right. And Perlman. This is where things really get fascinating, even more fascinating, if that's even possible. Perlman had a reputation. He had a reputation as a romantic, virtuoso, violinistic showman. He made recordings where the violin was always right up front and everybody else was in the back. He recorded what you might call the second tier romantic violin concertos. He's Tchaikovsky and Bruch and all that stuff. And so, and he did it very well. I mean, he's an amazingly gifted violinist, highly, highly respected as a technician. But like Heifetz, people sort of felt that maybe more profound and sublime things, like the Beethoven concerto, were beyond his Fach or out of his league, or somewhere on the other side of something or other, or whatever you want to say. Well, they made this. And teaming him up with Giulini was fabulous, because Giulini gave the whole production that patina of seriousness. And Perlman, who plays it absolutely as fabulously as anyone ever has, all of a sudden, he became a serious musician. Was it because of the influence of Giulini? Well, some people said so. Some people said that because of the seriousness of the whole enterprise, Perlman was able to reach deep within himself, to expectorate the bowels of his creativity, whatever that meant, and somehow all of a sudden become worthy of the Beethoven Violin Concerto. Remember, this was the Beethoven Violin Concerto where at the premiere, Clement, played some solo with holding the violin upside down. it was like a circus act. Well, I mean, the concerto wasn't, of course. Clement did that because this concerto was so serious and so unvirtuosic, and so supposedly not what a virtuoso violin player of the day would have done. So, and it still isn't, and it's not what a virtuoso violin player of today would have done. It's technically difficult because of its consistent cantabile emphasis on the singing tone of the instrument. Now, it just happens to be that Perlman had a cantabile like no one else. I mean, a gorgeous, beautiful, voluptuous, warm singing tone, which he could pour out. But he also exercised admirable restraint in this performance, and delicacy and sensitivity. And it seems like the partnership between him and Giulini was just an inspired one, and made inspired music. And thus, this became the reference. It was the one most talked about, the one most versions from this point on were compared to, the one that got the most press, the one that got all the chatter, that everybody bought, and that sold really well, and that, it's the reference recording. And so there you go. And it somehow managed to eclipse all of those earlier ones, however great they are, as the one that you mentioned when you talked about the Beethoven Violin Concerto, or references for the Beethoven Violin Concerto. Now, some people, being curmudgeonly, wanted to say, okay, it's the modern reference, and there were other ones before that, and all this. Well, yeah, maybe, who knows? If you want to go there, you can. But I think that we should give credit where credit is due, because this one really dropped like a bomb on the violinistic world and created an incredible amount of focus and attention. It was a wonderful thing in Perlman's career. And remember again, he redid it. He redid the Beethoven Violin Concerto with Barenboim later on, because when digital recording came in, everybody had to do a digital one or whatever. And nobody cared. Nobody cared at all, because this was the reference. And there's a lesson there. The lesson is, when you make a reference recording for something, even if you're a very self-critical artist who thinks that you have more to give to the work and you could do it all over again and maybe do it better, just don't waste your time, because no one's going to care. It's not going to make any difference. You've made your mark, and there is only room in the universe for one special version, usually. And I just love this example of how the record biz works, and what people's impressions are, and how things become reference recordings and become popular and whatnot. So this is one of the more recent of the reference recordings that we're going to be talking about. It was recorded in 1981, which is, okay, by God, that's already over 40 years ago. Can't believe it. I remember when it came out like it was yesterday. Really astonishing. But there you go. It's fabulous. It's the reference for the Beethoven Violin Concerto. I know you all have your favorites. I don't care. No one cares what your favorite is. this is the reference recording. So keep on listening, friends, and thanks for joining me. Take care.